Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Pisolans, and every Saturday we look at some of the stories shaping our continent. First up, we discuss the recent landmark rulings of the ECOWAS Court of Justice against Nigeria and Ghana and significance of both rulings for human rights in the region. Then, both Ghana and Nigeria are facing a cost of living crisis, which continues to bite hard. Nigeria ranked among the worst hit countries in Africa, while in Ghana, a recent report claimed that in a few years, malnutrition will be commonplace. We'll delve into the soaring inflation rates and the everyday struggles of Nigerian and Ghana households. Finally, we shift gears to the situation in Kenya. President Ruto has dissolved the cabinet. What does this mean? And is there a risk of copycat protests in West Africa? Joining me for insight on these critical stories is Isaac Kofi AJ, an analyst at SBM Intelligence. Welcome, Isaac.
Thank you for having me, Peace.
Yeah. All right. So this week was quite interesting because ECOWAS ruled that Nigeria violated the rights of citizens during the anti-police brutality protest in 2020. And then around the same period, it also ruled against Ghana in a case where the son of a deceased Ghanaian wanted to hold Ghana accountable for failing to investigate his father's disappearance. So, Kofi, can you walk us through the background of these cases? What was the NSAS protest about? And also for Ghana, what led to it?
I mean, the NSAS protest is actually one of the most popular protests in West Africa, which happened in Nigeria. And we all know that during this protest, I mean, we all saw what happened. And in fact, if you listen and you read the ruling, you realize that it was true that, I mean, Nigeria was actually responsible for the killings of those whose lives were lost during the protest. I mean, in the case of Ghana, if you look at protests last year and this year, I think it's been on the rise. Last year, we had a very significant one, which is the Occupy Julobi House protest. And so, in terms of West Africa, the West African sub-regions have a number of protests, most of it over Nigeria. And so, I mean, it's clear that Nigeria voted in those who lost their lives during the NSAS protest.
All right. So, but why did it take so long for these victims to get justice? And even after the rulings, the Ghanaian government, Nigerian government, has any of them acknowledged this ruling? Has any official statement been released?
Well, let me start with Nigeria. In West Africa, Nigeria is seen as the big brother in terms of almost everything, economic wise, even rule of law. I mean, and the fact that we are seeing this happening is to me is not a surprise because we've had, I mean, laws not being enforced in both Nigeria and Ghana, and so I was not surprised that the ruling, it was expected because there's no respect for human rights in our own domestic space. And so sometimes you even ask yourself, why do we usually run to ECOWAS? And that tells you that justice in a domestic space has actually failed. And in Ghana, for instance, if you look at the Mensah family, they were asking for just, I mean, things that the Ghanaian government could have provided. One was a document which actually included a 2019 UN ECOWAS investigation report on the same issue. Just look at the 2009 UN ECOWAS report that, I mean, Isaac Mensah and his family were just asking for this report. They also asked, information about the bodies that were actually evacuated to Ghana on the same issue. And then also a report on a certain disbursement of money paid by the Gambian government to affected families, which, I mean, those who were in Ghana were actually part. And so if you look at all of this, I'm actually looking at it from the side of Ghana, where we had all of this information, but we failed to give the Mensah family the kind of hearing that they actually deserve. And I always ask myself, if things are happening this way, it tells you how even ordinary, people in Nigeria and Ghana believe that the justice system in the dominant purpose. But the key question is, how many people even know how to file a case at the ECOWAS court? And how many even know that, there's this kind of process? And so the first point of call is the rule of law in the domestic space, which is actually weighing. And this is actually, evident why people are now skipping this process and going to ECOWAS for justice and all of that. But when these rulings are given, another layer of the problem has to do with enforcement. With the case of Ghana, for instance, now the court has ordered that all of this information should be given to the Mensa family. But you ask yourself, we already have an RTI law, a right to information law, that allows individuals to ask for information from information officers in various institutions. And within 14 days, they are supposed to provide this information. So you ask yourself, why do we have such a system in place, but the Mensa family could not get the document, the information that they actually demanded? And Ghana is actually at a very, it's actually facing a very tough test in terms of human rights issue, where currently there's an LGBTQI plus bill in Parliament, actually being, there's actually a court ruling on which is somewhere next week or so. And all of this is a big test for Ghana. And I always say that international human rights organizations will be watching, not just Ghana, but also Nigeria, how we are treating some of these human rights cases.
All right. So I'm glad you touched on enforcement, because I was just curious, because considering like ECOWAS, the strength of ECOWAS in terms of the influence it has on West African countries has been waning over the years. So I'm wondering, do you think that these rulings will be implemented? Are there any consequences for the Nigerian government or for the Ghanaian government, just in case they decide to flout what ECOWAS has said?
For democracy and also human rights development in ECOWAS, with the fact that, people still have the belief that there's a certain court in the sub-region that they can get respite from and also seek for justice. It's a good step. But you asked about enforcement. In the case of Ghana, for instance, the RTI law, if information institutions or information officers refuse to give this information to the people that requested for them, especially when there's a court order that give this information to the Mensa family. If the Ghanaian government refuse to do this, there's a penalty that they will have to face. There have been several templates in Ghana where even media houses have requested for information from different institutions and they refuse to give this information. And the RTI Commission has gone ahead to sanction. In terms of events, it's a fine asking for the information. But it goes beyond just fines and sanctions. It's about implementation. It's about having very robust, institutions that will enforce some of these things. And just like what is happening in Ghana is the same thing that's happening in Nigeria. I am waiting to see how this ruling will be implemented both in Ghana and Nigeria. But I can say that in Ghana, they've been to some of these rulings, whether by a court here in Ghana or a court here in the ECOWAS sub-region. Those who refuse this information
All right, I think my network was a bit bad towards the end of once. All right, so I want us to go to the second story quickly, because in this week we heard that many Ghanaians will experience a potential crisis of hunger and malnutrition by 2030 due to the shortfall in national fish production. And then this same week, we also heard that Nigeria ranks 5th among one of the African countries hit by cost of living crisis. So what are the factors driving these issues in Nigeria and Ghana? What is causing cost of living crisis? And why are Ghanaians at the risk of hunger and malnutrition?
Let me start with Big Brother Nigeria. I mean, in Nigeria, I think it's
Yeah.
been it's been evident that food insecurity actually started somewhere around 2019, and people have been struggling to get access to food, and then also it's not just because of supply, but it has to do with pricing as well, where it is becoming very expensive. On average, I think that in both Ghana and Nigeria, consumers spend about 90% of their income, disposable income, on food, and that is not acceptable anywhere. Even if you are not even allowed to spend more than 30% of your income on rent, and that will not be accepted as affordable housing. So if you are not allowed to spend about 30% of your income on housing, and you are spending about 90% of your disposable income on food in both countries, that tells you that, I mean, the level of food insecurity is actually very, very high. In the case of Ghana, for instance, you have a food inflation, which is still about 20%. And you spoke about people facing malnutrition as a result of the current projection, where, I mean, we even doubt that Ghana will be able to meet the fish demand that, I mean, the is actually currently prevailing, just because we've seen that over the years, over the past decades, the Ghanaian government have failed to tackle a very big problem when it comes to illegal mining, where they've sat down for illegal miners or galamseyers, like we say here in Ghana, to pollute almost all available water bodies in the country, especially in the western and central, and also in the Ashanti region, the eastern part of the country, where almost all river bodies for illegal mining activities. So what happens is that all of this fresh water bodies, either to available for fish farming and then also for fishing by fisher folks, are no longer available. And when you do some of these things, you kill the fishes, and then you also do not have the system where they are able to breed for the next set. And when this happens, it doesn't just stay in the freshwater. These river bodies called how do you call it? Shama. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. There's actually a place in the western part of Ghana called Shama, where the river Pra actually joins the sea. And for me, for the first time in my life, I've seen a brown sea in Ghana, a sea that looks like tea. I mean, it's so brown that it's so difficult for the fisher folks to go to sea and get a very good catch. Why is this happening? You have the River Pra, which is heavily polluted by galamseyers, gal miners, and this water body finds its way into the sea, making it very, very difficult for Ghana for fishermen to get a very good catch. And there's another layer to this issue that has to do with, fishermen actually not complaining about the fact that there's sort of encroachment by Chinese vessels who come here to fish on a very large scale, and they have, this um, canoes with outboard motors, and they are not able to compete. And that makes it very, very difficult for them to also get a good catch. And beyond, the Ghanaian government is trying to replenish the lost, fishes. And what they are doing is that they have the close season and all of that. But fishermen are complaining. It's hard. They now have to cough up more to buy, premix fuel, because they need to travel very far into the sea to get a very good catch. And even when you come into the freshwater bodies, it is almost impossible to fish in River Pra and Cobra and other rivers across the length and breadth of the country. So galamsey is a big factor here, threatening food security in Ghana, where even currently fish inflation is still about 38%, higher than the headline inflation currently.
All right. So considering that both Ghana and Nigeria are experiencing this crisis, how does this ranking and these issues, how does it compare to our neighboring countries? Is this a regional trend? Is this a common trend across the region?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a regional trend. I think it's a peculiar situation to possibly Ghana and Nigeria and some other countries in West Africa, because if you go to Ghana sits between Ivory Coast, Togo, and then Burkina Faso. I can say that it's a bit the same in Burkina Faso, but you can't say the same in Togo and Ivory Coast, where their inflation levels are down. Food inflation is very, very down, all in the single digit level. And so it's not like a regional situation. You can find pockets of these food insecurity threat across West Africa, but I wouldn't say it's a regional situation, because regions like countries like Ivory Coast and Togo, and then I think even Senegal have a peculiar situation where they are not really facing such threats that Ghana is facing in terms of food insecurity.
All right. So are there any government programs or policies in place to mitigate the impact? For example, in Nigeria, the cost of living on prices on Nigerians. And then for Ghana, is the government doing anything, considering that they've seen this prediction? Is anything being done, especially to help the fisher folk and then generally the citizens?
Well, I mean, there's a flagship program in Ghana called the government flagship program called the Planting for Food and Jobs and Rearing for Food and Jobs. And all of this is to help, mitigate some of this, threats, and then also make food available at a very cheaper rate. But since its inception or introduction, somewhere 2017, we've seen food prices and food inflation go up rather than come down after the implementation of the program, where government of Ghana spends about $70 million every year on this program, yet the impact is not really felt. Why? Because there's a huge gap between demand and supply. In terms of Ghana, for instance, we spend close to $38 million every year to import tomatoes and other tomato products into the country. More than $500 million to import rice into Ghana. We spend close to $3.8 million to import pepper and other pepper products. So, and onions around $1.6 million. So you quantify all of these things and you see that most of the inflation Ghana is facing at the moment is imported one, because you have a very weak local currency that whenever it struggles against the dollar, almost everything is affected. And so Ghana's situation is a bit complex, the extent that we import almost everything. In Nigeria, I know that, I mean, there's this rice, cultivation program that almost everything is produced in Ghana, and import is really, really restricted. You can't say same for Ghana. We spend so much on rice importation. And recently, the trades ministry was in parliament to introduce an airline to restrict some 21 strategic items, which I think rice was included, but it was fought against. I mean, why? Because we are not ready to restrict imports. If you do that, you are indirectly going to create scarcity, and that will drive prices up rather than bringing it down.
All right. So one of the issues facing Nigeria and Ghana is oil, fuel issues. In Nigeria, for example, whenever our fuel prices go up, then other prices go up. And I'm saying that in Ghana also, oil marketing companies have also raised their petrol and diesel prices. So what are the main reasons for this, especially in Ghana? What are the main reasons? What is causing the hike in petrol and diesel prices? And how has this hike affected the Ghana citizens?
First, the ordinary person in both Nigeria and Ghana, they can't understand why both countries are oil producing, countries, and yet we struggle so much with refined products and, price fluctuations. When you come to Ghana, for instance, there's an interesting trend whereby when the cedi misbehaves, or whenever the cedi, weakens against the dollar, the fuel prices also follow along. So there's this tangential, movement in terms of the trajectory where whenever the cedi, the dollar, the price at the pumps also follows through, where they are almost always the same. I think currently that $1 is selling for about 15 cedis, 40 pesos. you can get around, let's say 14 cedi, 50 pesos, and 15 cedis, 20 pesos, depending on where you buy. So there's always that tangential movement in terms of fuel prices and depreciation of the local currency, which is the cedi. And in fact, beyond the depreciation, there's also another layer to Ghana's problem that has to do with the number of taxes on the export price, where we've done the analysis. SBM Intelligence has done the analysis. We've seen that there's about 12 tax components, levies, and margins on the price build-up of fuel in Ghana. This accounts for about 20% of the total price. And if you look at it that way, it tells you that if the price levels or if the taxes are actually reduced to some substantial amount, I mean, that can also help drive down the price. But predominantly, Ghana's problem that has to do with fuel price fluctuations always emanates from the fact that we import so much refined crude, and whenever global prices are fluctuating, we also incur the kind of impact, the negative impact that comes along with it. Because this is a country, I mean, I'm talking about Ghana, that spends close to a year, sometimes every month, $400 million. And we don't print dollars in Ghana. And I know Nigeria, where is so much import crude situation, is so significant that if you compare that to the total import value of the country, that component is so huge and has a very, very pulling the strength of the cedi down. Hello?
All right, okay. I wasn't sure if it was my network or if you were done. All right, thank you. But are there any ongoing efforts towards regional cooperation in West Africa? People have advocated that since we are neighbors, then we should help each other, allow for easier export, import between African countries. So are there any ongoing efforts towards that? And do you think that would be a very good way to solve our economic problems?
And we should note that these are some of the reasons why ECOWAS, or the regional bloc, was formed to facilitate the free movement of goods. This has gone on for some time now. There are structural issues. The structural issues makes it very difficult, whatever beautiful policy that I must say, I mean, the sub-region might come up with. So until the structural issues are solved, it will be very, very difficult for us to get that sort of relief by trading with each other. How many years have we been talking about introducing, a currency? The reason why is becoming so difficult is that you have different narrative and different dynamics in almost all 16 countries in the sub-region, where it is making it so difficult to have that common currency or denomination to facilitate trade. So I would say that the free movement of goods and services and capital has gone on for some time, but the reason positive impact has to do with, look at the trade statistics of almost Ghana, Ivory to Senegal. You realize that they are logistics surrounding, trust and all of that. So until all are solved, there can be beautiful policy. But one aspect of the economy that is really, really, suffering as a result of this structural issue has to do with food. Imagine there's that, ease with which Ghana can trade with Burkina Faso to get tomato and other tomato products and all of that. But because of the border restrictions and all of these things, it's so difficult bringing the restriction that's available. It makes it indirectly impacts on the influences the final price that the consumer will buy here in Ghana, because they go through so much, the ordeal and all the bribes they have to pay at the borders and all of that. They factor all of this into the pricing of the final product. And so the problem is largely structural.
All right. So moving on to the last story, which is about Kenya. We discussed Kenya on this podcast some weeks ago. But after the protest, the President William Ruto, announced the dismissal of almost his entire cabinet. My question on this is, do you think this is a good move? Does this solve anything? Is it going to have any real impact on the fiscal crisis that caused the protest in the first place? Hello,
Correct. Same time or reading about it. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Hello?
I can hear you now.
Saying that hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that this is not just a somewhat armed country in Africa, and I think it's a good move. It's a good step, and, and a good progress in Africa to his narratives around, and it has to do with the fact that maybe he was misled or not being advised in a way so much detached from the people. So doing this for the people to know that he agrees with possibly all that they raised during the process. If you ask me if this is a good move, I think it's not just a good move, but it's an unprecedented stamp on the democratic, history of Africa.
All right. The president also blamed the U.S. Ford Foundation for the protests. He blames them for sponsoring the protest. Is this like a familiar tactic across Africa where presidents kind of blame external forces for the problems in their own country? Is this a classic case of passing the buck passing, and then shifting the blame to someone else and refusing to take responsibility? Or do you think that really other countries, external organizations have really influenced? Can you hear me now?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I think we should start the Kenya
Yes, yes. So I was saying that,
conversation.
yes, so I was saying that this week, the president also resorted to blaming the U.S. Ford Foundation for sponsoring the protest. Do you think this is a familiar tactic across Africa where leaders just come and
Can
blame?
we, can we, can we like Kenya? Can we start the whole conversation around?
No, please just answer this question.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So I can go ahead, right?
Yes, please.
All right. So I think that this is not something new in Africa where our leaders almost blame anybody for almost in Africa. But one we need to know is the overtime exercise on the action. But I think, and that's also the protesters blame monetary fund for the kind of it going through. And for me, that big factor is I have not seen that in Ghana where people go and protest and blame fund for a situation. I think that it demands more analysis where I think that over the years, Kenya has done in terms of getting from different the international capital debt relief program, and so hello.
Yes, yes. Kofi, can you just round up your response? We're having serious network glitches and issues. So you can just round that off.
So basically, all I'm trying is something normal in Africa, especially external sources, where even in Nigeria, the NSAR situation, we've seen that the fingers were actually pointed at cryptocurrency, Twitter and all of that. So it's something common in Africa. But bottom line, it's a domestic issue. And what the people feel is usually almost all the time very, very true. And if you look at the current Afrobarometer report, it tells you that if you sample Kenyans dwindling disposable income,
All right. All right. Thank you, Kofi. I'm afraid we would have to wrap up here. We apologize for the network issues that we're currently having. Thank you for participating in today's episode. And to all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. If you want to know more about our work, visit our website at sbmintel.com and remember to connect with us on social media. You can find us on X, Facebook, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. So that will be all for today. Thank you for listening. See you next week. Cheers.